What's good? It's Woog. I wanted to react to Billboard's 50 greatest rap groups of all time. They recently issued this list, and I just wanted to kind of go over some of the selections I agree with and some that I disagree with. Now, I want to do some subsequent videos as well. I want to cover who some of the snubs were, and we're going to get into some of that in this video. And I also want to talk about what constitutes a group. Like in the case of like Gang Starr, where you had DJ Premier making the beats, the DJ, and then you had Guru on the mic. Okay, that's a group, right? Well, I mean, kinda. Like, I see that Eric B and Rakim is at number 7. And, you know, I consider, obviously, Rakim to be one of the greatest rappers, and Eric B was the DJ / producer. But do you consider that a group in the same way that you consider Goody Mob, Bone Thugs and Harmony a group? And if so, was it simply that they named it Eric B and Rakim? Because, like, by that same standard, couldn't you also call Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre a group, in that when Snoop released Doggy Style, it was Dre doing the beats? Now I get it. Yeah, I mean, Daz contributed to beats as well. But yeah, I just found it interesting that in some cases they consider the producer / DJ and rapper combo a group, like DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. But then in other cases that I can name, they didn't consider that a group, or at least don't have it listed here in the 50 greatest rap groups of all time. But I just want to kind of go through these and just let you know what I do take issue with, who I was expecting to either chart higher or lower, and who I don't think belongs on this list at all, or at least not nearly as high as they've been placed. So let's start at the top. I don't have any problem with Outkast being number 1. And it's not just because I'm wearing the shirt. It's because if you go album by album and you look at the quality, you look at the reputation of the album and what it did to that artist's trajectory, I think Outkast is as good as it got. Everybody who was around and listening to Southern Playalistic Cadillac Music, their debut, loved that one. And most of them loved ATLiens even more. And then their third album, Aquemini, is usually in the top 10, often greatest rap albums of all time, not just for a group, but for anybody. Aquemini is known to be Outkast's best album, and it's their third album. And then you have Stankonia, which you could argue has the most Outkast hits. It had Bombs Over Baghdad. It had Miss Jackson, So Fresh, So Clean. So that was a commercial extravaganza. And then you had their Grammy Award-winning Best Album of the Year in Speaker Box, The Love Below. That was the double album. One side Big Boy, one side Andre. So it had Big Boy's I Like the Way You Move. It had Andre's Hey Ya, which, you know, that song was a Grammy Award winner. And then it had Roses, Caroline. Like, I'm still, you know, kind of salty that was the final Outkast album. But I mean, it wasn't a bad note to go out on. So yeah, no problem with Outkast being number 1. No problem with the Wu-Tang Clan being number 2. Now, granted, most people don't love the Wu-Tang albums after the first 2. So you had, you know, 36 Chambers in 1993, and then you had Wu-Tang Forever in 97. But between those 2 albums, you had that first onslaught of unforgettable solo albums, starting with, you know, Method Man's To Cal, which had 2 great singles, You're All I Need to Get By with Mary J. Blige, and it had a couple different versions of that song. It also had Bring the Pain. And quite frankly, out of the first 5 or 6 solo releases from the Wu, you could argue that To Cal, Method Man's solo, was probably the least renowned, or at least the least heralded and praised over the years. It wasn't a bad album, but it wasn't a great album either. But then you look at, you know, Old Dirty Bastards Return to the 36 Chambers with Brooklyn Zoo, Shimmy Shimmy Ya, and so forth, Rawhide, Baby Baby Come On, Baby Come On. And then you obviously had Raekwon's Only Built for Cuban Links, GZA's Liquid Swords, Ghostface Killer's Iron Man. So I think that the success that the Wu-Tang solo members had, and just their reputation and their just a larger than life persona, I mean, that Wu-Tang W is arguably the most recognizable symbol in rap music history, right? So it, you know, people didn't love the third Wu-Tang Collective album, the W. Some might have liked it, and some might have liked the 4th album, Iron Flag. Hardly anybody likes 8 Diagrams, right? But I don't think that this is just about what that group did collectively, album over album. You've got to consider the solo albums, and you've got to consider the overall reputation. And I think that went into a lot of some of these groups' placement here. Like if you look at the number 14 spot, that's the Fugees, right? So they had the 1994 album, Blunted on Reality. And then they had the epic second album, 1996's The Score. That would end up being the Fugees' final album, but that album was such a big deal. It was arguably the biggest album of that year. It was certainly one of the biggest rap albums of that year. I mean, you had a few really big ones, but I mean, All Eyes on Me and others. But The Score had Fuji La, it had Killing Me Softly, it had Ready or Not, right? It had Cowboys. It had a lot of good songs, and it was just a sensational album with immense commercial success. But after that album, the Fugees didn't release any more collective albums. I mean, Lauryn Hill ended up dropping the Grammy for Album of the Year in it was either 97 or maybe 98, but it was The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. And before that, Wyclef dropped The Carnival, both very good albums. And so I think that it was, Wyclef's solo album, Lauryn Hill just being a larger than life persona around that time. Like, she could have had it all. She retired even more abruptly than Outkast did. At least Outkast released 5 albums as a group before Andre basically retired. But Lauryn Hill basically disappeared after The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. Again, she won, there's certain years where the Grammys feature an artist that end up with a handful of Grammys. You've seen Mariah Carey with it. You've seen Whitney Houston with it. You've seen Billie Eilish with it. Well, in like 1998, that was Lauryn Hill. And then she retired. Yeah, she did that one Unplugged album. But yeah, she never really dropped a proper solo album again. Unbelievable, right? Well, the Fugees, again, I think that it was because of the solo members' reputations as well as the mega success of that one album, The Score, because most people don't remember Blunted on Reality. It had a couple cool songs like Mona Lisa, which was called Nappy Heads, but most people don't remember that one. But The Score was huge, and I think that and the reputations went into the Fugees, landing at number 14. I have no problem with N.W.A. at number 3. I wonder if they were just kind of giving the group a kind of a West Coast nod, because yes, they were pioneering and they were essentially the gangster rap pioneers, right? But N.W.A. had like a total of 3 albums and kind of like an EP, and that doesn't consider the original N.W.A. Before Straight Outta Compton, they had one called N.W.A. and the Posse. And that was when like Arabian Night and different members, the DOC, were also a part of N.W.A. But I think that they are considering here not only the pioneering nature of N.W.A., but what its offspring was, right? You had Dr. Dre coming from N.W.A. You had Ice Cube in his career, music and movie and Big 3 career after N.W.A. You had Eazy-E, who, founded Bone Thugs and Harmony, who landed at number 21 on this list, which I do kind of take issue with. But if you look at the descendants of N.W.A., Snoop Doggy Dogg, Dr. Dre also, discovered Eminem, and Eminem discovered 50 Cent. So the lineage of N.W.A., I think, went into its placement this high. I mean, it would have been like top 5 regardless, but number 3 above Tribe Called Quest, Run-D.M.C., I don't know, but I don't have a problem with it. Tribe Called Quest at number 4, I don't have a problem with. They could have even been a little bit higher, you could argue. Run-D.M.C, same thing. I mean, they were the biggest rap group at the time, bona fide legends, and they came in at number 5. You could argue again that they could have been higher. Now, Rev Run and DMC, they didn't go on to have great solo careers. Maybe that's why they're at number 5 and not higher. But if you ask anybody from around that time, Run-D.M.C was like the biggest deal, arguably, in rap, and they're here at number 5, which, it's kind of interesting because I saw, Boogie Down Productions, KRS-One and his crew at number 31. I mean, you have some contemporaries from that time who liked Boogie Down Productions more than Run-D.M.C. You had people who liked the number 6 group on this list, Public Enemy, more than Run-D.M.C. But you can't argue against Run-D.M.C. being the biggest of those groups. But yeah, I didn't have a problem with them at 5. I don't have a problem with Public Enemy at 6. Eric B and Rakim, we got into, is that a group? But okay, number 7. If that is a group, then why isn't, Cool G Rap and DJ Polo somewhere on this list of top 50? Salt-N-Pepa, damn, number 8, that's pretty high, but they were around for a while. a few album releases. And you could argue like their 93, 94 album, Very Necessary, had like the biggest, mainstream success. And that was like a few albums in. That was the one with What a Man, What a Man, What a Man, and Shoop, right? A couple of Salt-N-Pepa's biggest songs. And they, did Push It years prior to that. So they had staying power and they were a big deal. So I don't have a huge problem with them at number 8. De La Soul at number 9. Great group. Number 9 might be a little bit high, but I don't know. I don't have a huge, problem with that. Rest in peace, Trugoy. But yeah, De La Soul, phenomenal catalog. You talk, 3 Feet High and Rising. De La Soul is Dead. Even the lesser known ones like, Balloon Mind State. And then there was a Stakes is High, which is more my era. That was 96. I love the title track, produced by Jay Dilla. The Stakes is High. Listen to that album. Very slept on. But I don't have a big problem with them at number 9. The Roots at number 10. I mean, you want to talk about staying power. Look at how prolific that Roots band is. And they are a band, truly a band. And they've had members, former members, rest in peace. Hub used to be, on the bass. And he was out of the group for several years prior to his passing. But, Scott Storch, the legendary producer, was initially a keyboardist in the Roots. Like, listen to Do You Want More? From the Roots, their 1995 album. Like, listen to the song My Mellow, My Man. Listen to Scott Storch on those keys. He even gets a shout out. My man Scott Storch, My Mellow, My Man, when Black Thought is giving all the shout outs towards the end of the song. Very good album. The Roots, I mean, you want to talk about like a great run. So Organics was their debut, but then they went on this 3-album run. It was Do You Want More in 95. It was Illadelph Half-Life in 96. And then it was Things Fall Apart in like 99. It might have been 2000, but I think it was 99. That 3-album run, I would put up there with just about anybody, group or non-group. Beautiful albums. I don't even know how I would personally rank those 3 albums in terms of my preference between Do You Want More, Illadelph Half-Life, and Things Fall Apart. They just did not miss a beat. Even the album after that, a couple years later, Phrenology, very good album. Then Tipping Point, and they just went on to make a whole bunch of albums. Good albums. They maintained their quality, although I still think that 3-album stretch was the best of the Roots. They were just clicking on all cylinders, beats-wise, conceptually, just the versatility in their songs. But again, some of their later work is very good as well. They were never as popular as some of the other groups on this list. Like, they had a good following, and I mean, they're one of the best live performers. Like, not only Black Thought as an MC, but just the whole band. And when Malik B and Dice Raw were still MCs in the group, then they had like the human beatbox Rozelle and one of the greatest vocal scratch artists named Scratch, in the group. Great live group, the Roots. But they were never like a top 3 in terms of popularity, but their staying power, their reputation, they've gone on, and now, I mean, they've been the house band for Jimmy Fallon for the past like several years. So yeah, legendary Roots crew. They also like spawned the career of Jill Scott. Like, if you listen to their live album called The Roots Come Alive, that was a lot of people's first taste in listening to Jill Scott. So yeah, I don't have any problem with the Roots at number 10. Migos at 11, I was surprised by, because look, they had a long mixtape run before many of you were even aware of their albums. Like, before Bad and Bougie and that Culture album, they had several mixtapes. Some of the mixtapes were collabs with Rich the Kid. They had the Young Rich mixtape. They had Rich Timeline, that mixtape. They just had a few really good ones. They had that early single, Versace. So, in terms of culture, pun intended, Migos, maybe they do belong in the top 11 in this case. But when I see Bone Thugs and Harmony, who had more commercial success than Migos, and Bone is at 21, you got UGK at number 20. You've got, the Beastie Boys at number 16, and then Migos at 11. Now, granted, we're not living in a group era, so Migos is the most relevant and the best rap group over the past, few years. But it's just, if they are the best group of the era, then it's not out of the question to list them at number 11. It's just, I see too many groups underneath them, Mobb Deep, EPMD, Boogie Down Productions, The Clips, Gangstar. You look at these groups' catalogs, and you could argue that after Culture, they've kind of been on a descent. Yes, Culture 2 did have a couple, popular singles like Motorsport, but like by the time they got to Culture 3 and they all had their, solo albums, the albums didn't really catch fire. Like, I can't really say that Quavo's album, Offset, and Rest in Peace, Takeoff's albums were more popular than the first couple Bone Thugs solo albums. I'm talking Busy Bones, Heaven's Movie, and then Crazy Bones, Thug Mentality. Like, yeah, so just relatively, I feel like 11's a bit high for Migos. Number 12, Grandmaster, Flash and the Furious 5, don't have a big problem with. They were pioneers. I mean, The Message. No, they didn't have like the longest discography. They don't have like an immense catalog per se, but because of where they are on the timeline of hip hop and the role that they played in introducing, the United States to hip hop, I don't have a huge problem with them at 12. Mobb Deep at 13. You could argue that they might have been higher, that they could have and should have been higher, but I don't know, because they were certainly one of the best groups of the 90s and early 2000s, but we've already got like A Tribe Called Quest from the same era, Outkast from the same era, Wu-Tang from the same era. If you have too many groups from the same era at the top of a list, then you could argue that that list is kind of being, era biased, where it's giving, a disproportionate weight to a certain era. So Mobb Deep at 13, we already talked about the Fugees. Like, again, I think that the solo careers, the reputations played into it more than the Fugees catalog because they only dropped 2 albums as a group. And I was actually surprised to see Naughty by Nature at number 15. I thought that this was a little bit high. Yes, they do have some legendary, some timeless singles, OPP, Hip Hop Hooray, even Feel Me Flow was a fantastic single. Listen to where they got that beat from. It was a song by The Meters. Great sample and great use of the sample. And yes, I do think that as MCs, Tretch and Vinny are very underrated. And, shout out to KG, the DJ. But I just feel like there were too many groups around that time that you could argue, were bigger. I'm surprised that they were this much ahead of EPMD, for instance. And I mean, to put Naughty by Nature just ahead of Beastie Boys, like Beastie Boys, along with Run-D.M.C, Public Enemy, Boogie Down Production, were a part of that initial wave of of rap groups that were just killing it. And if you look at the Beastie Boys discography, like they had a few big time albums like Paul's Boutique, Ill Communication, and a few others. Even a few years later, like way outside of their prime, they had that Hello Nasty album that had a lot of success. So I thought that Beastie Boys, you could argue, should have been higher than 16, especially when you've got Naughty by Nature at 15. Again, I like Naughty by Nature. It's just that on the timeline of hip hop, putting them in the top 15, and yes, they did have, I would say, that first 3-album run, and that excludes their actual first album when they were still called The New Style. That album was called Independent Leaders, and it was like in 1989. But once they, had the album with OPP, which was Naughty by Nature, it was 1991. Then they had 1993. That was the one with Hip Hop Hooray. That was in 93. And then they had Poverty's Paradise, which actually won the first Grammy for Best Rap Album. I was mad. They actually beat out Bone Thugs and Harmony's East 1999. But yeah, Poverty's Paradise, that was the one with Feel Me Flow. That was a fantastic 3-album run. And then they started to, fall off a little bit. I mean, they didn't release an album for like the next 4 years, like 1999. And then they had like pop singles like Jamboree, but they weren't a great group releasing great music necessarily anymore. And that initial shine had worn off after those first 3 albums. And it's not like Tretch and Vinny went on to have, distinguished solo careers. So yeah, I was surprised again by Naughty by Nature at number 15, not because they weren't a quality group or even a great group. I'm just saying there were way too many groups here to consider to have them that high. Beastie Boys, too low at number 16. Cypress Hill at 17, don't have a problem with it. They were a hugely culturally relevant group, not only when it comes to like the pot industry, but if you talk about, Be Real's iconic style, some of their legendary singles from Insane in the Membrane to How I Could Just Kill a Man, and their staying power if you consider their first 3 albums. Those albums were Cypress Hill, Black Sunday, and Cypress Hill 3, Temple of Boom. But even after that, they had some success in some of their singles. Dr. Green Thumb, Rock Superstar, or Rap Superstar. They had two different versions of that song. So Cypress Hill, again, culturally, hugely relevant, a lot of staying power, just an iconic group. So I don't mind them at number 17. You could even have them a little bit higher, but 17 seems about right. I mean, you could have them a little bit lower as well, because there were a few other groups that I thought were too low. 3 6 Mafia at number 18. I don't hate that pick. They have a lot of staying power. They don't have the same lineup that they initially had in their first few years with, like, rest in peace to Lord Infamous. Lately, it's been just DJ Paul and Juicy J mostly. Also, rest in peace to Gangsta Boo. I was very surprised to hear about that tragic news. But 3 6 Mafia, again, a lot of staying power, and they started to peak commercially like several years into their career. So they had those early albums in the early to mid to late 90s when they were like contemporaries with Bone Thugs and Harmony. I mean, remember the versus battle that they had against each other. But they started to really peak when they had that feature on Hustle and Flow, where their songs were featured. You know, It's Hard Out Here for a Pimp and Whoop That Trick, songs like that. So yeah, 3 6 Mafia, don't have a huge problem, but I'm a huge Bone Thugs and Harmony fan, so I might sound biased, but I don't think 3 6 Mafia, in terms of their catalog, should have been above Bone Thugs and Harmony. Oh, by the way, Stay Fly was another big song by 3 6 Mafia late in their career. And Juicy J has been a mainstay and has done like a ton of features, mixtapes and albums, right? G Unit at number 19. I thought that was a bit high, especially if you're just talking about the group. Now, that group had 50 Cent. So is it just because 50 Cent's in that group that you elevate it in the same way that the Fugees are elevated because they had Lauryn Hill and Wyclef and only 2 albums? G Unit as a group does not belong this high. But if you're talking about, if you're looking at this and saying, well, they also had, Lloyd Banks, who had a couple good albums. And I mean, there was like a whole craze with G Unit when 50 Cent and company were storming the gates after he got dropped from Columbia, after his first album, Power of the Dollar, was never released. Then he got shot up. He got dropped again from Columbia. He got stabbed up, and he was just basically a rap outcast, if you will. And they started releasing those mixtapes where it was like 50 Cent is the future. And you used to see all 3 guys, Lloyd Banks, Tony Yayo, and 50 Cent posted on the cover. They were just dissing the hell out of Murder Inc. and Ja Rule. And there was just this whole, I mean, you could argue maybe that they deserve to be this high because of how they revolutionized the mixtape. So I guess you are considering their album with like Stunt 101, that G Unit album, as well as the mixtapes that they were dropping on the way to 50 Cent getting signed by Eminem, right? They were just on that onslaught. So maybe that's why they're here, because how they kind of changed the game in that regard. But again, just seeing G Unit above Bone Thugs, The Lox, EPMD, Ghetto Boys, Brand Nubian, yeah, I don't know about that, but maybe that's why. UGK at number 20. Interesting pick. Seeing 3 6 Mafia and UGK above Ghetto Boys kind of kicked down the door for, Southern groups. So to see them, that damn high and above Ghetto Boys, and Ghetto Boys as low as number 28, yeah, I don't know about that. But I'll say that the UGK legacy has aged well. You did get the early passing of Pimp C, and they had their biggest commercial success at the end of their career with like International Players Anthem. I mean, I remember UGK from like the albums Super Tight. I think that was like 94, and what was it? Riding Dirty, right? 1996, which had one hell of a track too called One Day. Like, fantastic song. But yeah, they started to peak late in their group, and then the legend of UGK has lived on because of how esteemed Pimp C is and how much truly Bun B has held it down. I mean, with his solo albums, with all of his features, with, the business that he's been conducting in and around Port Arthur, Texas. So yeah, I mean, I don't have a huge problem with it, but like again, discography wise, they don't belong above number 21's Bone Thugs and Harmony, who, you know, not only had that 1994 Creeping on a Come Up CD, but they had, in my view, one of the greatest rap albums of all time in East 1999 Eternal 95, which they then re-released in 96 when they upgraded the song, basically the Crossroads. Remember that initial release had Crossroad, totally different song, and it's also track 8 on both versions of the album, but they re-released East 1999 about a year later after they released that, the Crossroads DJ Unique, I think it was like the Mo Thugs remix, you know, the famous version of the Crossroads. And then after that, they had the double album, The Art of War in 1997, which had, you know, Look Into My Eyes, and it had Thug Love with Tupac, and, you know, and then they had the Biggie feature on Life After Death's Notorious Thugs, one of the greatest collabs. I mean, come on, like that's a lot of people's favorite Bone Thugs song. But then on that, you know, 95 album, East 1999, they had First of the Month. Again, they had the Crossroads. They had the title track, East 1999. They had Mo Murda, which is probably my favorite Bone Thugs and Harmony song. And then they had just a bunch of really good album cuts, plus the weed anthem, Buddha Lovers. And that wasn't the only Bone Thugs weed anthem. Later, years later, on that Resurrection album, they had Weed Song. And that, you know, the title track to that BT&H Resurrection album, that was a good song as well. So yeah, Bone Thugs at 21, I personally think is a bit low. And they released, you know, some music, a lot of music after that as well. Busy Bone is still releasing solo albums, as is Crazy. And they won like a Grammy or something with that I Tried song, like in 2006 with Akon. Think about it. That's like 12 years after their Creeping on a Come Up debut. And Creeping on a Come Up, that EP in 94 was the one with Thuggish Ruggish Bone, For the Love of Money, No Surrender. So yeah, I think Bone could have definitely been higher. The Locks at number 22, I'm okay with that. Sugarhill Gang at number 23. I mean, they had the first commercially known rap song, right? So if they are like you could say that they were kind of the Christopher Columbus. No, they weren't the first to get there, but they were the first to kind of make it mainstream, to popularize it, if you will. I know, bad analogy, but you know, Sugarhill Gang, which was Wonder Mike, Big Hank, and Master G, right? So they had Rapper's Delight, one of the biggest rap songs of all time, and the first, you know, commercially recognized rap song. So, you know, you had to put them somewhere. You could have put them higher. You could have put them lower. They didn't have, I mean, they did a version of Apache, but they didn't have like a big discography. But again, they had that founding Rapper's Delight song. So it's kind of tough to argue with. Now, the Diplomats at number 24, they really only had that Diplomatic Immunity album as a group. But, you know, they had Cameron, Joel Santana, Jim Jones. So maybe because of those solo careers, they're ranked higher. And on all of those solo careers, you had some, you know, Diplomats crew songs. But again, just looking at them as a group, they have a thin catalog as a group. But if you're anchoring this on like Cameron's solo career, then okay. But then, I mean, then you could make a lot of other decisions that aren't really pertaining to the group itself. And then we've got the Hot Boys at number 25, Juvenile, BG, Young Turk, Lil Wayne. I remember during that We On Fire, you know, that album, Guerrilla Warfare, Lil Wayne was like 16, 17 before he dropped that, you know, The Block Is Hot solo debut. But yeah, I like that Hot Boys album. I like the Hot Boys album even before that, just like I like that old Juvenile album, Soldier Rags, even before 400 Degrees. But yeah, the Hot Boys, when you consider like what they spawned, the career of Juvenile, the career of Manny Fresh, right, who was producing all of the Cash Money stuff at the time. Also the Big Timers, Baby and Manny Fresh, you know, that was a part of that whole Cash Money group. But the Hot Boys, the 4-group member, they had those couple of albums, and then a couple of albums after that, like Let 'Em Burn. But that was, Juvenile was already kind of leaving Cash Money at that time, but they had really good success just after No Limit hit. So No Limit hit, and which, by the way, you could argue like True, TRU, that was Master P, Silk the Shocker, and C Murder. You could have had them on this group of 50. But again, we're gonna get into the snubs in another video. I don't have a problem with Hot Boys at number 25, especially when you consider Juvenile's solo career BG's solo career, and obviously Lil Wayne's solo career and everything that he spawned with his own label, Young Money. So yeah, let's stop at number 25. I'm gonna do another video addressing number 26 through 50, and then another video talking about what actually constitutes a group. But then I wanna do another video specifically addressing the snubs, because I've got a list of groups that I want to argue whether they should have or should not have made it. It's a lot of groups in that too, like Black Moon or Camp Low, or the Lost Boys. The Lost Boys aren't on this group of 50. But yeah, let me know what you think about this list so far. What were your earliest impressions when you were looking at this list? Let me know what you agreed with and disagreed with, and who would be your greatest 5 groups of all time. Please let me know in the comments, and keep your eyes open for the next video because it's coming. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you love music like I do. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.